Hey guys, it's Yogi here with some Project Cars AOR Elite League Season 3, and today we do have the next round, round 7 at Hockenheim, and as you can see it's pretty dark and it's also raining. We're going to be driving through the very early hours of the morning into the break of dawn for the race at this round. And yeah, we've got some wet weather to contend with as well, but it is forecast to dry up towards the end of the race, so that'll be rather interesting. We're currently just on a qualifying lap at the moment. This is the first qualifying lap that I did. Qualifying session for this round didn't exactly go well. My second lap that I did was actually the fastest lap that I put down in the qualifying session, so we're going to take a look at that one, we'll run you through it, and then of course we'll go into the results of qualifying and then follow on to the actual race itself. So here we are coming out of the final turn, hooking that up rather nicely, not getting any wheel spin on the exit of the corner, so just putting the power down as we come over the start finish line now to actually start the fastest lap that we put in, braking just as we get to the curbing, hooking up the inside curb very nicely, and also not using too much curb on the exit there as it's pretty tricky and it will upset and potentially spin the car. Now coming down into turn 2, getting pretty close to the apex on the inside there. Could have been a little bit tighter to the curb, but still pretty good. Hanging it fairly tight on the exit to try and open up the left-hander kink there to come onto this here long back straight. Just trying to take the shortest route as possible. And now coming up to the top end of the Z4, braking just as we get to the curbing on the left hand side, braking about 120 metres before the corner. Looking up the inside curb there on the hairpin, probably could have done away with actually clipping and bouncing over the curb itself, but the exit was pretty good, minimal wheel spin. Now coming through this very fast right hander, a tiny little bit of twitch from the rear end and coming into the braking zone of this next left hander before the Mercedes Stadium. The rear end of the car just sliding a little bit, but able to keep that in check quite nicely. A nice smooth run through the right hander that follows there. Now coming into the fast right hander that leads into the stadium section, the final sector of this circuit. Could have been a little bit quicker through that right hander, but still carried a fairly decent amount of momentum, and as you saw, 6 tenths up on our previous lap. Coming into the rather tricky hairpin there. Rear end is just wandering a little bit as the rear tyres are still spinning up, trying to find the traction, but managing to keep it on the circuit. Coming into the final turn now, trying to put down the power, getting a little bit of a twitch from the rear end. We're going to come across the start finish line to set a 142.533, and we're currently going into P6 as we get a nice little slide there through turn 1, but I'm now going to retire to the pit box and we shall take a look at the qualifying results. So there you can see I actually ended up qualifying in 7th position, just behind Brownski. I didn't improve on my lap time, but my teammate Andrex managed to qualify in 5th, about a 10th up the road from myself. Very close between Andrex, Brownski, myself. Also AJ was pretty close behind. Also RC Monster, Jellyfish, Silver Arrow as well. All within 3 tenths of each other there. And now taking a look at the second half of the leaderboard. We've got Papan there in 13th, Maisie in 14th, Tony R in 15th as well. A couple of fairly big name guys who have been racing with in terms of points in the actual championship standings down there in the bottom half of the leaderboard. So hopefully we can convert this into a fairly decent result and see if we can get ourselves a nice big haul of points for Team Eurex Racing. Okay, so here we go then with the main event, the race at Hockenheim for round 7. There is a Z4, just popping the car up into first gear, making sure that's all settled, just waiting for the start sequence to begin, and that green light building the revs, launching the car off the line and getting a pretty decent start, immediately closing up to the gap. Well, closing the gap up to the guys in front, but it looks like Brownsley's got a pretty good run there on the roof, trying to have a little bit of a look down the inside as he goes and hops across the curb there. But it seems like everyone has pretty much just settled into the positions that they were previously in for the moment. Brownski trying to go down the inside of my teammate, who does brake a little bit later coming into turn 2. Both of them giving each other room, having a little bit of a look to the outside of Brownski there, but not really able to capitalise on anything. Now coming out onto this long back straight, hopefully we'll be able to pick up the slipstream and see if we can close this little gap that has developed between myself and the guys in front, and the R rate with its V10 has just pulled itself ahead of Andrex with complete utter ease. There was nothing that Andrex could have done about that. So Brownski slotting himself up into 5th position at the moment. I'm still holding on to the 7th place that I started off with, and now Eurex Racing are running in 6th and 7th with Andrex in front of myself. And we will see if we can try and make it up a couple of places and hold on to the guys in front as I go hop off across the curb on the exit there of that right-hander. I completely missed the apex and just ran out wide, but I managed to get away with it as well. Just about managing to hold on to the car and stop it from spinning. So it looks like that Brownski's had a pretty poor run through that right-hander. Has given Andrex a bit of a look down the inside, coming into the stadium section. They're going side by side as they come through the right-hander. Andrex giving Brownski a little bit of a squeeze. He hops across the curve there. He had to get out of the throttle, and Andrex has slipped himself back up into 5th position that he started in earlier on in this lap, and we're now back behind the Audi R8, and he'll be very, very eager to try and follow Andrex through, as the Z4 is very, very good in these conditions, especially when Brownski has a pretty poor line there coming through the penultimate corner, coming out of the final turn now, getting a much, much better run coming out the exit. Brownski had to use the curb on the exit there a little bit, ran out a little bit wide, almost getting a little bit of a run coming down towards turn 1, trying to present myself in the mirrors of Brownski, trying to slip up the inside. He gave me racing room, but I wasn't really in the prime opportunity with the right line to try and take it, and I'm now just basically battling against the Audi's acceleration, and he's managed to, under braking that, get himself back just in front of myself and was able to take the apex again. And there you can see just the acceleration of the Audi as he starts to pull away. Pedro is now coming up behind me in his BMW M3. You can see him there in the rear view mirror as we take a quick glance over, and he's now actually trying to pressure and have a little bit of a look down the inside coming into the hairpin, but I just cover his line off and prevent him from making that move as we get a little bit of oversteer there coming out through the exit of the hairpin just as we were starting to pick up the throttle. And you can see Brownski has now already pulled a gap of 1 second, this time making sure we hit the apex on the inside there through that right-hander, and we want to try and forget about Pedro behind us a little bit, as it looked like he ran a little bit deep there into that left-hander under braking, which would have given us a little bit of breathing room. And you can see closing up just ever so slightly to Brownski in front of us through the corners. Like I said earlier, the Z4 does fare a little bit better in these wet conditions, as the Audi with an awful lot of power does tend to light up the rear tyres, which does cause them to overheat quite rapidly. You can see I'm watching the temperatures there on my Motec display of both the brakes and also the tyre temperatures as well as we navigate the last couple of turns. You can see having to work the wheel just a little bit more than I had to on the previous lap as the tyres are starting to increase in temperature. That rear left is getting pretty warm, popping over the 100° C mark, but we get a pretty decent run coming through turn 1 for the beginning of the 3rd lap. Now coming into the braking zone of this very tight right-hander. Tend to hold it tight and bring it all the way over to the right-hand side to try and open up that left-handers. Try and make sure that I can do it pretty much full throttle or with just a very, very small lift. And once again, like we saw in Abu Dhabi, that Audi just monsters away from the Z4 under acceleration. Braking pretty early there. Also struggling a little bit to get the car slowed down. Has put an awful lot of steering lock there to get the car tucked into the hairpin, but we managed to get it through without any drama, and we continue on round. You can see gaps starting to develop to the guys in front. Andrex doing quite a nice job of building a gap to Brownski behind him, and also kind of keeping in sight with the guy in front as well, as Brownski runs a little bit wide there, going over the white lines through that right-hander. So now coming to the stadium section. Could have been a little bit tighter there as Brownski bounces over the curb on the exit, hooking up this hairpin quite nicely. Just need to be really, really careful with the traction coming out of that corner as you're still turning coming into that mini chicane there, and that can just cause the rear tyres to spin up and cost yourself an awful lot of traction. As Brownski actually now goes to spin over to the right hand side of the circuit there, as he ran across the curb on the exit. I'm guessing he just lost the traction on the rear tyres, is exactly what we were talking about, and spun over to the right hand side. That's gone and gifted me P6. I've now got a 2.2 second gap to Andrex in front of us, has given us some plenty of breathing room to try and focus and run my own pace. Hopefully we'll see if we can close the gap up to my teammate Andrex in front of us, and see if we can help him to try and apply some pressure to the guys in front. But at the moment things are looking pretty good as they are coming into the braking zone of the hairpin, braking a little bit later than we did on the last pass through. And you can see there Pedro pretty close to the rear of our car coming out of the hairpin. Obviously Constantino effect of the cars under braking and then accelerating through the slower turns means the gap closes up visually and then extends once again. And there you just saw having to give a quick flick of opposite lock as the rear end wanted to step out a little bit. And for those of you who have been keeping an eye on the rearview mirror, you probably would have seen that Brownski has rejoined in 8th place behind Pedro. So he didn't lose too much time, but he did lose 2 positions with that as well. And it looks like I've taken about 3-4 attempts out of Andrex at the moment, or at least it did. The Delta's shot back up again to the 2-second mark. So we just navigate our way through the final turns, come over the start-finish line. It looks like just taken a couple of attempts out of him on that previous lap. Pretty good pace at the moment, as you can see. Very, very good consistency. Only 1/100th of a second between my 3rd and 4th lap. And they were both about 2 tenths off my fastest lap so far, which is obviously the 2nd lap, back where the temperatures were looking very, very nice and rosy. You can see the temperatures there on the Delta, sorry, on the Motec display. Rear tyres are relatively warm. That inside front right for this next corner is looking pretty cold. It doesn't really get too much use around this circuit. It doesn't really get put under load all that much. Brake temperatures are looking pretty good, staying under the 600 mark, which is where I want them. Still staying rather nice and warm as well. We've got currently 83 litres of fuel for this race, so we won't be taking any fuel on board. But like I said back in qualifying, it is meant to clear up later on in this race, and we will be going from these night conditions and into the early sunlight hours of the morning. It looked like there was a couple of cars there battling coming through this hairpin, which should hopefully allow Andrex to close up a little bit more to the guys in front as they're taking time away from each other. And I'm taking more time out of Andrex at the moment as we're extending the gap to Pedro behind. Is currently around about a second. It's about 1.5 to 1.7 seconds between myself and Andrex. And you can see it's just gone 5 tenths faster than my fastest lap so far. So we're starting to pick up the pace. You can probably also see the temperatures are starting to take a toll as well. We just need to manage those and try and not spin up the rear wheels too much in the important traction zones, and make sure that we get the good smooth runs coming out through the corners to accelerate ourselves down these straights. And the track lighting looking very, very nice. It's reasonably well lit around this circuit, even though it's pretty dark in places. There are floodlights intermittently around the track. It does look quite nice. Also the stadium's there lit up quite nicely as Papan ends up leaving the session. He started off behind me down in the second half of the grid, so not entirely sure what happened to him and how far he got working his way up through the field, but that's not going to affect my race, my position at the moment. Still holding on to 6th.
Behind is now 0.8 seconds.
So 4 tenths down on the previous lap, which was the fastest lap that I did of this race. So come into the stadium section now, just making sure that we use camber there to our advantage to help us turn through the corner. Kind of roughly at the same sort of gap to Andrex as we were on the previous lap, roughly about 1.5 seconds.
The leader has just done a 1:43.3.
Coming out through the final turn now, should be a 43 lap, yeah, 43.7, so we're about 0.4 of a second slower than the leader, according to our race engineer, getting up on the curb there on the exit of the first turn, which is not ideal. If you catch that wrong, it's very easy to lose the car and it'll spit you off to the right hand side of the track and into the wall, which will obviously severely wreck and ruin your race. Will give you a whole load of damage, and you've got pretty much an entire lap to drive back to the pit lane with that damage as well. But we managed to get away with it, just basically running over the top of the curb. Would have had to lift it out the throttle ever so slightly to make sure that the rear wheels don't spin up, and you can see that Pedro getting pretty close once again, under braking visually anyway. The gap has actually closed up. It seems to have taken about half a second out of me coming through that hairpin. I've actually gone and lost about half a second to Andrex as well, so I'm not entirely sure why I was so slow through that corner. Wasn't immediately obvious. Possibly just taking not enough apex speed, just running through the corner a little bit slower than other people, maybe braking a little bit earlier than I had been previously as well. All the guys are managing to bring up some confidence and brake just a little bit later to try and eke out some time and start applying the pressure. I can actually now start to hear Pedro's car behind me as well, and you can see him there in the mirrors as I'm using the TrackIR to look through the turns and look around the cockpit of the car as well into the mirrors. Absolutely fantastic piece of kit, and it's really heightened the spatial awareness that you have around your car and the visibility that you have. You can look in through the corners a lot easier, you can look at reference points a lot easier, and obviously use all the mirrors on the car and look out the side windows to see where other drivers are around you as well, rather than just purely relying and hoping that they're going to stick to their line and that you'll be able to stick to yours, and you give each other enough racing room. But starting on lap 8 now, and Pedro is closer than he has ever been before, and he looks like he's starting to pick up the slipstream. Here we go then, as he's trying to make a move down towards the inside, giving a little bit of a squeeze as we come into the hairpin. He's there actually on the inside, very tight to the corner. He actually holds it tight, and I'm going to have to take the outside line around him, try and apply the throttle as smoothly as possible to try and get the traction coming out of the turn. We're going to come side by side into this next right-hander, lifting off as I've given him plenty of racing room on the inside there. He's still over to my right somewhere, but I've got the inside line for this next left-hander. He's trying to make a little bit of a switchback, but I was able to get on the throttle early enough to try and negate that advantage. And you can now see the Audi R8 of Brownski, who's 8th position, is starting to close up onto the back of us as well, as Pedro's very close as we come towards the stadium section. And that fairly fast right-hander just moving over to the right-hand side a little bit to cover off the inside line. He's not really going to be able to make a move coming into this hairpin here, so I can just basically run my line as per usual, same through these two turns, and then it'll be once again the same coming into the penultimate corner here, and it'll be all about the exit that we get coming out of this final turn and on the run down towards turn 1, trying to apply as much throttle as possible. You see the rear end was sliding just a little bit there, which would have cost me a little bit of momentum, but I managed to hold on to the back of that, hooking up the inside curve quite nicely, but having to give a little bit of counter steer there, flick it over to the left twice just to keep the rear end in check. As now Pedro having a little bit of a look there at the inside into turn 2, but thinks better of it and tucks back in behind me as he'll try and line himself up once again for the slipstream coming down to this back straight down towards the hairpin. Definitely close enough for that slipstream. He's starting to pick it up now. Once again we'll perform that defensive manoeuvre where we'll let him take the inside line. We're then going to squeeze him all the way over to the right hand side of the circuit. Just as we come into the braking zone, I myself are going to flick over to the left, and he's going to be very tight to the apex there. Just going to perform a nice switch back on him, applying the throttle now as we've now got the inside for this next right-hander king. We're once again going to go side by side through here. Both of us will surely have to back out the throttle to give each other racing room, taking that inside quite nicely, and Pedro just backs out of the move and slots back in behind me for the moment, and I'm now just about managing to hold on to 6th position. And that defensive manoeuvre that we just did into the hairpin, that was the second time that I did that. He'll be more wise to it coming into that hairpin if he gets the slipstream once again for the 3rd time. So I'm going to have to mix it up a little bit there as the rear wheels light up on that outside curb, costing me an awful lot of traction. You can see the car just skyrocketing the revs up into the limiter. But we're just about managed to keep ahead of Pedro for the moment. He's definitely looking like the faster car out of myself and him.
44.4.
And I'm sure it's only a matter of time before he starts to slip past. The temperatures are still looking pretty good on my Motec display, and all this battling has allowed Andrex to pull a gap to over 3 seconds in front of us. You can see my lap times have dropped now up into the 144s. I'm having to go defensive and having to go side by side with Pedro's through multiple corners. As we now come into the tight right-hander of turn 2, I'm going to try and get the best exit as I possibly can, but once again that M3 with its amazing aero efficiency was able to apply some pretty good traction coming out of the turn. And now Pedro has pulled out of the slipstream, moving to the right hand side of the circuit. There you can just see the flash in the rear view mirror. He's moved back over to the left. He's on my outside, glancing over. We made a little bit of contact there. We've got stuck on each other a little bit. It's made us both run deep into the hairpin, both of us running off wide onto the exit zone. And we're now just rejoining the circuit in the safest manner that we possibly can. Still back side by side between myself and Pedro. He's right there alongside me on my own side. We've got Brownski right up in my rear view mirror as well, very close, but we've got the inside line for this next left-hander under braking. He's trying to perform a switchback, you see there in the side mirror. Having clocked that, I'm trying to block that off as much as possible, and was trying to cover the inside line on the exit to try and prevent Pedro from coming back through. And there's a little bit of contact there as he didn't really anticipate that and the slow speed that I was carrying, but we've both managed to get away with it. And Brownski is still there behind us, but Pedro is definitely looking like the faster car at the moment. It's only going to be a matter of time before he does manage to find a way past myself. All this defensive driving that I'm having to do, it's costing me even more time to now Mini Black, who's up in front of us. I'm guessing teammate Andrex has managed to get ahead of Mini Black somewhere along the line in amongst all the battling that we've done. And it's now Mini Black in his roof that is in 5th place. He's a good 4.5 seconds up in front. You can see starting to wrestle the car a little bit more, trying to extract a little bit more pace and see if we can try and pull away. But on that previous time round, I think I just squeezed Pedro a little bit too much, and I think I was gently moving across to the left hand side of the circuit, which led to the contact between ourselves, which took away all the braking power and efficiency that we had, which caused us both to run deep into the hairpin, and it almost allowed Brownski to get up alongside us and potentially take away the 2 positions. This time Pedro isn't really close enough, but he does get very, very close there in the mid-apex of the hairpin. But the gap once again visually concertinaing, but even still he's got much better traction coming out the exit of the turn. I was just able to hold on to the back of my car and keep the time that he did gain under braking and hold on to that coming out the exit. So now coming to the stadium section, a little bit more steering lock there, and I'd probably like to. I was probably scrubbing the front tyre a little bit too much, which goes a little bit deep there into that left-hander hairpin. You can see having to fight the car a little bit on exit as I was trying to apply the power.
43.3.
Get on the throttle. Once again, it's all about trying to be as smooth as possible in these wet conditions. Just be gentle with the steering, gentle with the brake and throttle inputs.
Just keep it smooth, no mistakes.
And just trying to stop the car from sliding exactly like it did just then. And I caught the curb rather awkwardly on the exit, which is going to cost me all momentum and has allowed Pedro to slip himself up into 6th position, dropping me down into 7th. I did say it would only be a matter of time, but I wasn't really planning it to come from a mistake like that. Fortunately, I was able to hold on to the car and not lose it and spin off into the walls, or Pedro gave me plenty of breathing space as he did slide past. He obviously saw me bouncing across the curb. He ran pretty deep there into the hairpin itself, running out fairly wide, but his exit is half decent. As you can see, he didn't really gain too much time from that. But yeah, that one small momentary lapse of concentration had just taken that tiny little bit too much speed through the first turn and getting up on that curb. It's going to cost me 6th place, but it's still in sight. I've got a fairly decent gap of 1.7 seconds to Brownski behind as well, so got a little bit of breathing room there. And we'll see if we can hold on to the back of Pedro for the moment. As we come towards the pit stop phase, it'll probably be in and around somewhere between lap 17 to lap 23, lap 24 is probably when the pit stops will start to come in. You can see that the tyre wear is pretty good on my car down in the bottom right there. Still got ample tread on the tyres. You can probably also tell it's starting to get a little bit lighter up in the sky as we're coming towards the break of dawn. I think the rain is starting to ease just a little bit as well. It hasn't eased off completely. It is still raining. It's still quite clearly visible raining. The track is still quite clearly visibly wet as well, but it does seem like there's a few less raindrops on the actual windscreen itself. So it's going to be very important that we make sure not to cook the tyres, as there'll be less surface water on the actual circuit itself. Taking a rather awkward line there through the hairpin. Turned in, I think, a little bit earlier than I actually wanted to and made it a little bit tighter, which means I wasn't able to pick up the throttle in quite a fashion that had been on previous laps, and would have liked to have been doing so, as it looks like my team at Andrex there has been very, very slow somewhere along the line, rejoining the circuit between myself and Pedro. Pedro now up into 5th position. Andrex has gone and lost 2 places, dropping down from, he would have been in 4th place, and he's now down in 6th. So a moment somewhere along the line for Andrex, and now right behind him, which is possibly giving myself a little bit of encouragement. Now I've now got someone to focus on directly in front of me, but also a little bit gutted for Andrex because he was looking in a very, very strong position. He seemed to have very, very good pace. He was able to keep up with the guys in front of him and battle for what could potentially be a podium position, but he's gone and lost that for the moment, and I've gone and lost sight of the apex there, running again once over the curb on the exit of turn 1 there. It's going to cost me an awful lot of momentum and an awful lot of time. The gap has gone, well, I pretty much lost a second just through that one turn alone. Andrex has gone and increased his gap to 1.3 seconds, and now Maisie, who has swapped places with Brownski, is in 8th position, having started down in P13, 14 or 15, one of the 3, I think it was P14. He's now got himself up into 8th place, and it looks like he's actually starting to close up onto the back of me, so he's got some serious pace in his Audi somewhere along the line. You can see him there in the rear view mirror. It's under a second now to the rear of my car, so we're going to have to be very, very careful and keeping a watchful eye on him behind. So I just don't seem to have any real pace at the moment. You can see Andrex is starting to pull away even more. He got the gap up to 1.5 seconds momentarily, so came into the braking zone of that right-hander, and Pedro has romped away off into the distance as well. So gaps are spreading out in this stage of the race, so I'm trying to look after the tyres a little bit, as my actual strategy is to try and push as far into the drier conditions as possible to make sure that when I get onto the slick tyres that track isn't going to be wet and the slicks are going to work straight from the off. So get an awful lot of understeer there coming into the penultimate corner. The front end of the car is just completely washed out and just not turning in whatsoever. So losing an awful lot of speed with that this time round, hooking up the curb in the inside for turn 1 and avoiding the curb on the exit there. So able to carry the speed and momentum through the corner this time round and not have to worry about trying to fight the car and prevent it from spinning round. A fairly decent run through turn 2 there. Turn 3,
1.1 seconds.
only 3 100ths of a second off my previous fastest time in the race so far, so things are looking pretty good so far on this lap. Braking pretty early still though for the hairpin, just babysitting the gear shifts and taking a fairly nice line through the hairpin. A pretty decent run through that, was able to get onto the pedal quite nicely. You can see the temperatures of the tyres looking pretty good for the moment as well, likewise the brake temperatures. not going above 600 degrees in the braking zones, but getting up into the high 500s, which is very, very nice for the steel brakes on these GT3 cars. You can see there, doing a pretty good lap so far. 4 thousandths of a second up on my previous fastest lap. Hopefully we can hold it together in this stadium section here, this final sector, and post our fastest lap of the race. Getting pretty good traction coming out of the hairpin and now coming into the last couple of turns. It looks like Andrex is struggling even more with the car in front of us, as he's now actually gone, I think I got a slow down penalty and had to hang to the inside line on the track there, and has gone and gifted me P6 once again, and he's now going to be under threat from Maisie behind, and I believe Maisie has actually managed to slip past Andrex, carrying a little bit more speed and momentum coming out of the final turn, and has gotten ahead of my teammate. Very, very unfortunate there for Andrex, as he picked up that speed penalty. It's going to cost him 2 positions. I think Brownski's probably somewhere relatively close behind as well. And you can see Pedro has now got a 3.5 second gap to myself up ahead, which gives me plenty of clear air, but at the same time would prefer to be a little bit closer with a little bit more pace in my car, so I can try and push and really try and close the gap up onto the back of him. Basically give myself a target to work at, as at the moment it looks like that Maisie is closing the gap up to myself quite nicely. Saw him there in the wing mirror on the left. You can also see him there in the rear view mirror coming through that right hander. Slight twitch of the wheel.
The gap behind is now
1.1
seconds.
Pretty good run through the second sector, coming into the stadium section now as well. Doing some pretty good consistent lap times. Hopefully we stay down in these low 143s. Should allow us to close up to the back of Pedro. As you can see, I've already taken a fair amount of time out of him on this lap. I believe he probably made a mistake somewhere along the line, as he's gone and lost almost a second to myself in those 2 sectors. And over the course of a lap,
your fastest lap today.
And there you can see a high 142, very, very good lap time. Hopefully we can stick to these, as I believe the track is actually now starting to dry out as well. You can see very few raindrops falling. You can still see the drops of rain on the windscreen in places. So I'll be keeping the windscreen wipers on for the moment. The track does still look relatively damp, but you can start to see daylight is starting to break through these clouds as they start to break up, and we start to head ever closer to the break of dawn, and the sun starting to peek over the horizon, which obviously means that the track temperatures will start to increase along with the ambient temperature as well. The lap times will get faster, especially in these drying conditions, and the wet tyres do hold off quite nicely for a few laps. Like I was saying earlier, I want to try and hold on to the wet tyres until I know that for certain the track is dry enough for slicks. And you can see even more time being eked out there, which is completely natural in the drying conditions. The track will just get quicker and quicker.
The leader has just done a 1:42.0.
And I think this is where I felt that the car was pretty strong, and myself pretty strong as well, especially considering the amount of tyre tread that I have left on the tyres as well. I'm sure a number of other guys were probably having a lot more tyre wear issues than myself, which would mean that they would have less tyre tread and therefore less grip.
Your lap times are improving. This is
compared to myself. For the moment I've got plenty on all 4 tyres. Obviously the right side of the car is doing better than the left, and you can start to see the temperatures are now starting to increase even more on the Motec display there. You see most of them popping over the 100s, and that front right hand tyre is getting a little bit warmer, not quite in the 90s. It'll obviously cool down as we come down this long back straight, but as we go through the sequence of turns and the turn in the wheel, putting load through the tyres, it'll increase in the temperatures. Yeah, very nice traction there coming out of the hairpin, not really all that much wheel spin if at all. and the gap still hanging around 2.6, 2.7 mark to Pedro in front. Increase the gap ever so slightly to Maisie behind me. It's now just over a second. It's turning pretty early there for that right-hander. Almost bouncing across the curb on the inside, but
the gap behind is
managed to spot that happening and took some of the steering angle out of the wheel. And a pretty decent line there through the hairpin in the stadium section. The rear end of the car is just wandering ever so slightly. Not too much, just very small quick flicks of opposite lock just to make sure that the rear end stays in check. Front end of the car,
your left rear is
hooking up very, very nice. Able to carry a fair amount of speed through the corners, and it's turning in just as I would like it to. It's just in the traction zones that the rear of the car is moving around just a tiny bit. Not much, it's not massive oversteer, but it's probably just about right, just where I'd like it. Enough rotation through the corner to get the car quite nicely tucked in, the rear end to follow, but not so much that I'm having to fight it and hold off the throttle. So it actually looks like Maisie has made a mistake somewhere along the line and has dropped back to about 2 seconds. I did momentarily look in the deltas and Andrex was behind. I believe those two are now battling for position somewhere along the line. I can't quite see them clearly in the mirrors, so I can't really see how their battle is getting along, but the gap's gone from just under a second to over 2, so it's gone and lost an awful lot of time somewhere along the line, and the gap to Pedro is still pretty much even as it was previously, so it's not like I've gone and gained an awful lot of time somewhere along the line, unless Pedro has done exactly the same. So it must be Maisie making a mistake, and the track is certainly now starting to dry up a fair amount more. Just there checking the tyre pressures, making sure they are still where I want them, which they are.
Now 2.1 seconds.
Lap times are still tumbling. Still a tiny little bit of rainfall. It's very, very minimal at best, and you can see the track is starting to dry up as well, and you can actually now start to hear the tyres biting into the surface of the tarmac and starting to squeal and scrub. And this is where the car starts to feel good, and this is roughly round about the time where I want to start thinking about pitting. I believe the two guys behind us, both Andrex and Maisie, have made their pit stops. Brownski is the next car in 7th position now. He's a good 7 seconds behind, and we're actually starting to maybe close the gap up to Pedro in front of us. It's down under 2.5 seconds now, so now it's time to really start to push. It's probably going to be on this lap that we're going to make our pit stop and switch over to the slick tyres, as I'm only now going to start to cook the tyres, the wet tyres that I currently have on the car. At the moment you can see the temperatures are quite high. Still got plenty of grip though. It's just there was a slight moment through that left-hander there where the outside rear tyre wanted to break traction once again just there as well. Just spinning up a little bit, just making the rear of the car step out just that tiny little bit, but able to keep the car pointing in the correct direction. Again, the car sliding a little bit under braking as Pedro now actually goes and dives into the pit lane. So I'm now actually going to stay out and see if we can get another lap out of these wet tyres and see if we can hop Pedro, as I don't believe, I'm not quite entirely sure and quite convinced that it's quite the right moment to be hopping onto the slick tyres just yet. As you can see, I've still got the windscreen wipers on. As long as the car doesn't get too hot, I should be okay. I'm currently in P3 at the moment, as other people have gone and dived into the pit lane as well. Yep, it's going to be this lap that I'm going to be diving into the pits. It also looks like Brownski's actually stayed out for the moment as well. He's still behind me now in 4th position, but 8.5 seconds behind Mini Black. There's a good 12.5 seconds up the road from myself, so quite a big gap between myself a mini black there for the moment, but that's not really the person that I'm worried about right now. It's more Pedro and where he is going to be in relation to me when I come out of the pits after making my pit stop. So we've got to try and push an attack on this lap and just hope that the track wasn't quite dry enough for the slick tyres just yet, and that when I make that switch over, it's going to be absolutely spot on. It looks like there's still a couple of drops of rain falling in this stadium section here. I still see just about 1 or 2 streaks of water on the side windscreen there, but now we're going to dive off into the pit lane. I want to try and attack this pit entry, try and make up as much time as possible, just making sure that I've got the right pit strategy there selected as we now come into the pit lane.
Behind is pitting.
You can see Tipple there in front of us, and also one other driver as well in front of him. I'm not entirely sure if that's person actually for position, that Aston Martin that's in front, or whether they had retired to the pit lane.
Just done a 2:13.3.
Currently in 8th position at the moment, so we've got a couple of cars in front of us in the pit lane. There was Andrex. He must have made a mistake somewhere along the line. I thought he had pitted, but he apparently hadn't. We're now coming out of the pit lane. Where is Pedro? We're going to be pretty close, I believe, alongside each other as we come out through the exit of the pit lane, and I believe I'm in front of Pedro at the moment. The deltas are being a little bit weird. There they are now switching, and I now actually managed to jump Pedro in the actual pit stops. You can see that confirmed down in the bottom left, and you can also see that with Pedro being in the rear view mirror, he's going to have a pretty good run. His tyres are probably up to temperature and the better pressures than myself. He's got the slipstream as well, moving to the inside, coming down towards the hairpin. I'm not really going to defend too hard from that as the moment as he actually runs deep, and I'm going to now go perform a switchback through the hairpin itself, trying to light up the rear tyres coming out the exit and trying to apply the traction to the tarmac of the track. And we have managed to hold on to our 6th position for the moment, but we've got Kaki who's a good 12 seconds up the road as it's very, very slippery there coming into that left-hander, having to fight the wheel a little bit. It just turned in, looked like there's a few drops of rain still falling just there as the weather is localised on the track. Take it fairly easy coming through here as I can still see a little bit of rain, and it still looks like the track is just a little bit slick. Just taking it fairly easy for the moment whilst we try and wait for these tyres to kind of come back up into their optimum temperature range and get up to the optimum pressure. Once they're there, that's when we can really start to attack and really start to push. And you can see just managing that section just a little bit better, than Pedro behind me. Getting a little bit of a slide there through turn 1, however, and we're now actually up into 5th place as I believe we've hopped AJ, who was in the pit lane. So this is looking like a very good result for us at the moment in this very early stage. There's a car not too far up the road, but I don't believe that is Kaki. I believe that is a back marker, as Kaki is 12 seconds up the road from myself at the moment, and Pedro isn't going to be close enough this time around to attack into the hairpin, so I'm just going to take my usual line, braking in the usual place, getting the car slowed down, turned in quite nicely, and here the tyres scrumming away underneath the car as they're biting into the surface of the tarmac. The sky is starting to clear with the clouds as well. There are still quite a few hanging around, as you can see there in front of us, but there are also some pretty big clear patches, and you can see the sun is starting to rise up over the horizon, or come up towards the horizon shall I say, over to the driver's left. So now come into the stadium section, getting a nice smooth run through that very fast right hander, now coming into this rather tight hairpin.
The leader has just done a 1:40.6.
And the leader's just gone across the start-finish line. So you can see, kind of visually, roughly, the distance between myself and 1st position. Don't quite think I got the pace for a podium But I certainly do feel pretty good on these slick tyres at the moment in these slightly changeable conditions. You can see the car is reacting a lot more to my steering inputs and is turning in a lot more than it had been previously. So it looks like we've got two back markers here, BMW M3 and also a McLaren are battling away. Hopefully they'll see me coming and get out of the way without hindering myself. Khaki 12.5 seconds up the road. We're kind of relatively even on pace for the moment. Pulling away from Pedro, we got the gap up to 1.5 seconds now. So I'm just feeling that a little bit more comfortable on these slick tyres, as these guys are still attacking each other, giving them a little bit of a flash of the lights just to tell them that I am coming up behind them and I would like to pass as soon as possible. The M3 moving quite nicely out of the way there. Would have preferred if he hadn't have got onto the brakes, so I did have to back out the throttle a little bit there just to make sure that I wasn't going to go into the back of him. Hopefully now we'll be able to get past this McLaren relatively soon. He's just going to take his usual line though through this right-hander. Does he move out of the way before the hairpin? No, he doesn't. So we're going to have to step behind him for the moment, as he looks like he's running out a little bit wide there. It's going to cost me the exit that I probably would have liked to have taken, but he's stayed out of the throttle and slotted in behind myself. It's going to cost me a few attempts. Not the most ideal ways to pass a back marker, but we did it without contact.
That's your quickest
So
lap. Come on, keep
I'm
digging.
relatively pleased about that. Just set my fastest lap of the race so far. However, Khaki has now turned up the wick and he's got the gap up to over 14 seconds now to myself in front. Gap to Pedro is still hanging around the 1.5 seconds mark for the moment, as we're going even quicker in the first sector. You can see the nice orangey yellowy glow of the sun changing the colours of the sky and the horizon behind the tree line that we can see in front of us. As the sky is starting to clear up a lot more, the clouds are dissipating and disappearing. It seems to be a lot clearer, which will help in the temperatures coming up a little bit more and help with the tyres. But in a moment, just trying to be smooth and steady, hold on to this 5th place. This will be a very good haul of points for myself. I don't think I'm going to have the pace to be able to catch Khaki, as he's now got the gap up to 15 seconds in front of myself. Pedro is still hanging on to the back of me. Gap is still around that 1.5 second mark for the moment. He's now come out onto the start-finish straight to begin lap 26.
Last lap was at 1:39.6. That's your fastest lap.
It's just another 12 laps to go. Things are looking relatively good, as the gap is now actually up to 2 seconds to Pedro somewhere along the line. So he's had a little mistake potentially through the first turn, probably hooking up the outside car a little bit more than he probably liked to.
2 seconds.
Which has obviously cost him a little bit of time. Also gone once again, setting an even faster lap time. And my fastest lap of the race so far. Braking just as we get to that curbing. Not really troubling the brakes at all at the moment. We don't have ABS or traction control or stability control on in these races, so just trying to avoid blocking up the tyres under the braking zones. And just carrying the speed that I need, and making sure that I get the car slowed down enough to hook up the curbs and the apexes and place the car exactly where I want it. As you can see, I'm 4 tenths up on the fastest so far at this stage in the lap. Khaki is still pulling away at a fair rate of knots, now up to 16.5 seconds up in front.
The guy ahead has just done
Gap to Pedro is coming down a little bit. He's taken a couple of attempts out of myself somewhere along the line. So I'm going to have to be relatively wary of him closing up behind me
That last lap was
at some point in the race.
1:38.9. You're 2/10 off the pace in sector 1. You're a second off the pace in sector 2. You're a 10th off the pace in sector 3.
And there the engineer just giving me a breakdown of my lap time and my sector times, comparing them to basically the fastest guy in the race so far, and I'm losing about a second here in this sector alone. I think partly due to the lack of the Z4's top end speed, also probably due to the setup of my car that I was running for this race as well. Obviously the wet conditions at the start, having to adjust my setup for those and run a little bit more downforce than you would usually if you were just running in purely dry conditions. Even though the Z4 does have good aero efficiency there, just checking up on the tyre pressures. Things are looking pretty good around there. Probably like them to be just a tiny little bit low on the left hand side, so it's around the 2.0 bar mark on all four corners of the car, but still nothing alarming in those, which should mean that tyre wear will be good, tyre temperature will be good, and therefore tyre grip and the handling of the car will be good as well.
The car ahead is just done at 1:37.8.
So we're now coming up onto the back of another back marker. You can see the track is a lot brighter now than it was before. The sun is continuing to rise up into the sky. I imagine next time round we may just about be able to see it peeking up over the trees.
Looks quite high.
As this back marker moves over to the right hand side of the circuit now, just lifts off the throttle to let me through, getting well out of the way very, very nicely, not costing myself any time. This rear end of the car is a little bit loose there, coming through the right hander, but holding on to that quite nicely. And there you can see the sun is just about now starting to peek over the horizon, over the top of the trees in the distance. Very nice yellow orangey glow. Some really absolutely fantastic colours in the sky here in this game, in these conditions, and it looks even better with the floodlighting around the circuit as well. Looks very, very cool. Just taking it smooth and steady at the moment. You guys have been keeping an eye on the deltas. Kaki has got the gap up to 19 seconds.
The gap behind is now 2.6 seconds.
And my race engineer there from the crew chief app just telling me exactly what I was just about to say. That the gap to Pedro is about 2.6 seconds to myself behind. So things are looking pretty good at this stage in the race. We'll just keep it nice and smooth and keep the car on the track without making any mistakes. They'll be in a pretty good place for fifth position.
1:39.0. Lap times are pretty consistent.
So it's a pretty good lap. Still down in the 1:38s, which is where I want to be. Could have been a little bit tighter there to the inside curb and the apex on that right hander at turn 2. Not really troubling the car too much through turn 3. So we come down this long back straight once again, accelerating up through the gears, shifting just as the car hits peak power. Try and maximise the acceleration now under braking, shifting nicely down through the gears and into the hairpin. Nice smooth run through there, not really troubling the exit curb too much. And now with the increased visibility, I'm now actually able to properly see the track around me and all the curbs, the apexes, the braking points and everything that I need to see, all my reference points that I'm using around the track. Which makes it a lot easier to be a lot more consistent, but even still, drive the track enough times, muscle memory does kick in and it allows you to run very good consistent lap times in the pretty poor conditions that we had at the start of this race, being at night in the rain as well, where visibility is severely reduced. Now the sun's starting to come up even more. You can see the orange glow is now washing over the circuit. in this early morning light. On the run down towards turn 2, braking just as we get to the AstroTurf runoff or slip road on the left hand side of the circuit, about 80 to 70 metres before the corner. Now coming down this long back straight, just hugging this inside curb here on the left hand side of the circuit. Now we'll brake just as we get to the curb on the left there, about 120 metres before the turn. Turning the car in quite nicely, unwinding the wheel. The rear end of the car wanted to rotate a little bit more than I was expecting, hence the quick turn of opposite lock, but not really troubling the car too much. Getting the car quite nicely slowed down for this here left-hander, avoiding the large orange sausage curb on the inside, as that will bounce the car and unsettle it quite badly. But you can take the normal blue and white curbing as on the inside there, also through here as well. You can also use the curb on the outside there. Just make sure you're
the car ahead is just done at
either on the curb fully, or that you go over the curb fully with the outside wheels, obviously still keeping at least 2 wheels within those white lines. But if you do have half a tyre on the curb and half a tyre off it, it can bounce and unsettle the car quite poorly, like we've seen myself doing so through this first turn. As Lucas Schumacher drops out the session, he was also behind me, so there's going to be no change of position. It's not going to affect my race at any point, as we're now coming out towards the back of another back marker. Kaki, good 21 seconds behind, sorry, up ahead. It's Pedro, who's 2.5 seconds behind. Temperatures on the tyres are looking pretty good. Car right on the limit of locking up there in the braking zone. You're just skidding and bouncing around quite nicely as we get it slowed down. Temperatures in the brakes are looking pretty good. They are creeping up over the 600 mark a little bit, you can see there in the braking zones, but they quickly drop back down underneath it. Essentially want to be aiming to stay just under 600. Ideally it gives you about 500 degrees no sorry, 50 degrees buffer
the leader has just done a 1:38
to the 650 mark, which is where you will start to see quite a bit more brake fade and lack of braking performance. Essentially the rule of thumb is you don't let the brakes drop below 300 degrees on the straights, but not pop over the 600 degree mark under heavy braking at the slowest point, or the heaviest braking point on the circuit. So things are looking pretty good at the moment in terms of all that. You can see the brake on the front right is just that tiny little bit cooler than the brake on the front left. That is due to locking. Obviously, if you lock a brake, there's going to be no friction between the brake pad and the brake discs, as they're not rotating anymore, which means that they do not increase in temperature. As you can see, it's only a small lock-up that I've had somewhere along the line, but that probably would have been earlier on during the race, and it's pretty much just going to stay like that. The front left will cool a little bit quicker than the front right because of the temperature difference, but still, there you can see they're starting to close up on each other in terms of braking. It's about 10 degrees between the front left and the front right at the moment, but that's nothing to be too alarmed of. So we're starting to get a little bit closer to this Z4 in front of us, and actually taking a look down at the delta times and delta positions down below us. I believe Kaki is going to slip past Tipple somewhere along the line. Tipple's now 19.5 seconds up the road from myself, so Tipple's now in 4th. Karki's now popped himself up into 3rd position, but we've now got Brownski behind us. He's managed to get past Pedro somewhere along the line, but he's a good 3 seconds behind, which means Brownski could have some pretty decent pace. The AOR rate is good around this circuit in the dry. Struggle a little bit more in the wet, and as you obviously saw at the start of the race, Brownski did qualify ahead of myself by 0.5 of a second, as this Audi goes very, very deep in here into the hairpin and runs out wide. Not really quite close enough to slip past, but he moves over to the left, the right hand side of the circuit there, and gets out of the throttle and lets me slide past without issue, so it didn't cost me any time, which is absolutely fantastic. Very, very thankful for that. But even still, Brownski trying to extract pace out of his R rate.
The gap behind
He's
is
got
now
the gap
2.8 seconds.
to under 3 seconds, like
The leader has just done a 1:37.5.
like the race engineer said just that. The gap was down to 2.8 seconds. It's now popped back up to 3. Now it's gone back down to 2.7 again. The delta times do change pretty rapidly through sequences of turns like these, so it's more on the straights that you get an accurate representation of just how far behind they actually are. It seems he's around about the 2.7, 2.8 mark to myself for the moment, so he seems like he's got a little bit more pace. So we're on lap 34 out of 38. 4 more laps to go. Hopefully we can hold on to this 5th position, and that Brownski won't close the gap up so quick that we come under immense pressure towards the end of the race. Not going to be anywhere near Tipple unless he has a major mistake somewhere along the line and loses an awful lot of time, as he's 20 seconds up the road in front. So there's not really much I can do about him. It's all just about myself keeping the car on the circuit, making sure that I nail the braking points and the apexes, do good, smooth, consistent lap times, try and slow Brownski's advance to the back of my car behind me, and he's already got the gap to around 2 seconds, so he's going to take in a good 7 or 8 tenths out of me in the first half of the lap. So again, just taking a quick check of the tyre pressures there. Things are looking pretty good, fairly close to the 2.0 bar mark, which is what I'm aiming for with the temperatures, with the pressures on these tyres. I want that across all 4 corners, so grip is good, but it seems like that Brownski has a little bit more grip than I do at this current stage, as the gap is still hanging around that 2 second mark. Doing okay, consistent lap times there in the low 138s, which is pretty good. Relatively happy with that. Ideally I'd like to be a little bit closer to the 138.0, possibly down in the 137s, but we're doing okay so far. Getting a pretty good smooth run through the hairpin, but it looks like Brownski's going to take even more time out of me so far in this lap. We've got enough fuel to last to the end of the race. Tyre life is looking good, so that's not going to be a worry for the end of the race either. It's pretty much just going to be a pure straight fight between myself and Brownski as we're coming towards the last 3 laps.
Decreased to 1.3 seconds.
Brownski taking even more time out of me. You can see him there now in the rear view mirror as well, decreasing that gap. So it's going to be a repeat, but also a reverse of Nürburgring, the opening round 2 this season, where I was closing Brownski down in the final 10 laps of the race. And we got pretty close to the back of him towards the end, but he put up an almighty defence and prevented me from getting past. This time it's the other way around. Brownski is now the hunter. I'm being hunted. And hopefully we can keep Brownski behind, hold him off, try and keep hold of this 5th position. As we haven't got long to go. Still very good consistent first sector. 0.04 of a second off the fastest first sector that I've done so far. So pretty happy with that. The gap is around that 1 second mark to Brownski behind. He will close that gap up a little bit coming down the straight, as the Audi R8 has a little bit more top end speed than the Z4. Likewise coming out the exit of that hairpin there, who have better acceleration than I will, and you can see the delta time is tumbling between myself and him. Is now down to half a second. You can see him very clearly there in the wing mirror on the left, and now also in the rear view mirror there as we come through that right hander, having to fight the car a little bit as it slips quite nicely through the corner, right on its slip angle, but probably sliding just a little bit too much more than I would like it to. So now come into the stadium section, coming down towards the last couple of corners, and then we're going to start the final 2 laps of this race. So here we go then. 2 complete laps to hold on to 5th position.
2 laps
Just
left.
try and stop Brownski from slipping past myself. Let's go and bounce over the curb there on the exit. That's not ideal. That's really not what I wanted. That would have cost me a little bit of time and also momentum. You can see the delta has dropped down to half a second to Brownski behind me. He's going to be pretty close coming onto this back straight. It looks like I've had a pretty good run through turn 2 and 3 though, and managed to eke that gap back out to 0.8 of a second. He might start to be picking up a little bit more of a slipstream though, and his V10 will be pulling himself along this back straight a little bit better than my V8. Likewise coming out the exit of this hairpin here. You can see him getting very, very close to the back of my car there as he used the outside curb. You can see he's got the gap down to 0.3 of a second, and he's closing up ever more as we come down towards this Mercedes stadium just here. Just taking a quick look in the rear view mirror, trying to carry as much speed through that corner as possible. Taking up quite a nice line, just about managing to stay off the curb on the exit. Good line through there as well. Managing to gain 0.3 of a second to bring it back up over half a second through those sequence of turns. And you can see it's starting to push a little bit harder now than I had been previously, trying to pick up the speed where possible. Got a couple of laps down in the 137s as I get an awful lot of oversteer coming out the exit as I get on the power of the hairpin in the stadium section just there. Having to fight the rear end of the car, but just about managing to hold on to the rear and stop it from spinning off to the left hand side of the circuit. The gap is up to a second. This is going to be the final lap. This is going to be very, very intense indeed, as Brownski, I'm sure, is going to be pushing like a bat out of hell to try and close up onto the back of me and try and mount an attack and see if he can gain a position, one final position on this final lap at the end of this race. And obviously I'm going to need to push like absolute crazy as well to try and hold him off behind me. Tipple's had a mistake somewhere along the line. You can see the gap is down to 10 seconds, or should I say 9 seconds, but still he is not going to be close enough for myself to really mount a challenge on him. And my main worry is Brownski behind for the moment, just holding a fairly tight line coming into the hairpin just to try and cover off and make sure that he doesn't try and make a move down the inside into the hairpin there. Getting a fair amount of oversteer as we try to apply the power coming out of the hairpin. He's got a pretty decent run coming down towards this left-hander, holding to the middle of the circuit to cover off that inside line and defend it once again. Going to be a little bit slower than him as he takes the usual racing line through that left-hander. Just going to open up this right-hander for himself as well. But I've had a pretty decent run, just moving over to the right-hand side once again to cover off and defend the inside line, prevent him from trying to make a move and gain that final 5th position on this last lap. Once again holding to the middle, being very, very defensive, making it clear where my intentions lay, and that is to keep him behind as we can now come into the final couple of corners of this circuit. Brownski getting very, very close to the rear of my car, but it looks like I've got the run through these final 2 turns, and we're going to hold on to 5th position as we come across the start-finish line to complete round 7 at Hockenheim of this Apex Online Racing Season 3 Elite League on PC. And that was a very good race with a very, very good result. Really, really pleased with that one. Relieved that I was just about able to hold off to Brownsky behind, who quite clearly had the pace over myself. And taking a look at the leaderboards, you can see F1 Massa came away with the win, with Mini Black coming up in second and Kaki getting third. Tipple in fourth place, myself in fifth, Brownsky sixth. And then Pedro, Maisie, my teammate Andrex dropping down into ninth position, not having the best of races for himself, considering he could potentially have been on for a podium in this race. AJ in 10th. Now taking a look at the bottom half of the leaderboard, you see Jellyfish there in 13th, Togamis in 14th, Nostra, Centro, Vice Guy, Fizzy Fan being a couple of laps down, Lucas Frisch, who had a DC, along with Tony R, who I believe retired from the race. That was the Aston Martin that we saw in the pits when we did our pit stop. And then Papand, who also had a disconnect earlier on in the race as well. And here you can see the overall team championship standings, and things are looking half decent for ourselves. Eurex Racing kind of in a very nice battle for third position at the moment. That is going to be our target for the end of the season as we come in towards the final 3 rounds, rounds 8, 9 and 10. Our next race is going to be at the Snetterton 300 circuit, one that we haven't raced at AOR before, so it'll be very, very interesting to see how that goes. Hopefully things will be all good there, and we can get ourselves once again another good result. It should be a track that suits the Z4 quite nicely. But yes, that's going to conclude it for this race. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave those down in the comment section below. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Hit that subscribe button, and hopefully I shall see you in the next race. So in the meantime, take care.